Okay, so asynchrony. Why do we care so much about the normal waveforms? Being able to recreate normal waveforms so that you can identify abnormal waveforms. Hopefully correct them. So we're breaking up asynchrony into two different types. Phase and assistance asynchrony. Phase, all we're talking about, hey, it's either in the trigger or the cycle. So let's back to first quarter. Trigger starts the inhalation cycle, ends the inhalation, begins the exhalation. So somewhere in there, the patient isn't coordinating with how you have it set. And we'll look at different examples. So let's be sure we can identify a trigger. Most often you're going to see it. It's easiest to see on your pressure waveform because there's this obvious negative deflection right here. Okay, you don't see except that the breath actually started, so you can't tell did the vent trigger it or did the patient trigger it on a flow waveform. You just can see that the breath has started via the waveform. Same with the volume. Okay, so the only one you can tell if the patient triggered or didn't is this pressure waveform because you get that negative deflection. So the pressure waveform is going to be the most useful in almost all of these. It's going to be the most useful, but definitely on trigger. Cycle is where that inhalation ends. So here on your pressure, it's at the max pressure. Here at the flow, it's where that flow goes from one direction to the other direction. So right here at your 0. And on volume, it's where your tidal volume reaches its max and starts going the other direction. That is the end of inhalation. Assistance asynchrony. Assistance asynchrony is a mismatch between the patient demand and what you are given. We're going to break up both of these and look at a lot of them. So we'll go into that one next. Oh, and then I circled for you guys exactly where is that on my waveform. It's where that breath is being delivered, usually in the form of flow. Okay, so you're especially going to see it here in that pressure waveform if something's wrong. Okay, so let's talk about the different type of phase asynchronies. Again, phase is just trigger cycle. Okay, beginning of inhalation. So let's break those up. First, we have an ineffective trigger. Ineffective trigger. So this means that the patient tries to trigger the breath and the ventilator does not deliver. I wish I could draw on this because I would just continue this, but let's create our own pressure, flow. Okay, so the ineffective trigger, per the definition, hey, patient tries to trigger it, vent doesn't deliver. What's that look like on your waveforms? Waveform. Yeah, you don't see the breath getting delivered. Yep, that's perfect. So this is our trigger and the breath is delivered. Here's a trigger and something monstrous is missing there. There is no breath delivered. That's an ineffective trigger. How do we fix that?
Change the sensitivity.
Change the sensitivity. Perfect. How do you know you have the right sensitivity?
You're getting a positive reflection of pressure breath.
Yep, you're getting a breath once you've adjusted it. Okay. Okay. Delay trigger. So let me point out for you. I wrote next to it inherent. Okay, this is just an inherent dyssynchrony with a ventilator is that no matter what, when a patient inhales, there's going to be a bit of time that vent needs to deliver the breath, right? where naturally when you and I are breathing, we don't have to wait for a breath to get delivered to us when we contract our diaphragm. But the vent, they have to wait this little bit of time right here for that vent to recognize, oh, I see a negative deflection in pressure, I'm going to give it. So it's inherent and it's always there. Some of you guys have looked into a mode that corrects this. Some of you, and those of you at Children's have seen it. Mode is probably an inappropriate way to say it, but technology is maybe the better way to say it. That's why I went away from mode versus to technology, a specific technology. And so you guys have seen it. Somebody's explained it. I can't remember who.
Is it NAVA?
Is it that like esophageal balloon kind of?
Not the balloon, but it does go down the esophagus.
Whatever Kelly.
Kelly's group. Who's Kelly's group?
NAVA, NAVA.
It's Nava. Nava, yes. Okay, so what Nava is doing is, because mechanically here, the ventilator has to detect a change in pressure or a change in flow, and then it says, okay, I'm going to give you a breath. That's a natural delay from our normal breathing. So that's your delay trigger. Nava reads the impulses of the diaphragm. So the second the diaphragm impulses, it delivers a breath. So that delay is significantly lessened by Nava.
Drager is a big thing. Catch the trigger.
That's an awesome point. Is the sensor on most ventilators is all the way at the ventilator. So that's going to cause more of a delay in your trigger. The Drager and the G5 have a proximal flow sensor, which is right at the patient here. So that delay trigger is a lot lessened by that. Very tight. Okay, so that's delay trigger. Auto trigger. Auto trigger by definition is the vent is triggering and the patient is not telling it to. It's triggering on its own. So say you have the vent set at a rate of 16. You walk in and it looks like your patient's breathing 40. But they're not actually, you look at them and they're not actually trying to trigger the breath. That's an auto trigger. So something else is triggering the breath. What would that something else be?
It's too sensitive.
Okay, that's how to fix it. We would correct our sensitivity. Absolutely. I just heard water in the tubing. For sure. Something that changes the pressure in your circuit. Water in the tubing, secretions, keeping, something that's going to change the pressure and it just triggers on its own. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes you think the patient's just a kipnick and doing crappy. And you have to really watch carefully, like, wait a minute, I'm doing that to the patient. They're not doing that themselves. It can be a hard one to see. If it's like 50 or 60, you're like, oh, that's auto triggering. But sometimes it's a little more subtle. So that essentially it looks like usually it's going at a faster rate than you would expect. So you're gonna get your deflection, because whatever that deflection is it's not the patient causing it, but somewhere there's a pressure deflection. And the vent reads it, and then often it happens almost right away again. So you're kind of getting breath after breath after breath after breath. Auto trigger often is just boom. Okay, so those are the three trigger asynchronies. Any questions about those three? Later slides will identify. And that's as far as you guys are going to be getting this semester in asynchronies is just identification. So to say, oh, I see this waveform and that's an auto trigger. I see this waveform and that is ineffective trigger. That's as far as you guys are going to be getting here is identifying. Okay. Auto trigger is the patient's not doing it, but it's happening. Okay. Yeah. Cycle. So a cycle is, so each of these has a link, and we're going to go into them a little further, in which gives the specific definition. So you can click on, give the definition. We'll look at each of these slides, just not quite yet. But a premature cycle, okay, so cycle is this part of the breath here, where inhalation ends, is that the patient is still inhaling and you're stopping the breath. But yet they're still inhaling. Okay, let's think about what that will look like in a waveform. Okay, they've started a breath, they're inhaling. They're still inhaling. But the breath stops. So I guess the question is, where is that in your settings?
Change the IDE ratio.
Yeah. It's hard to see on a pressure waveform. You may see a little bit of negative pressure in this area. But ultimately, they're wanting this. Okay, so they're wanting more eye time. They might want more volume. We'll talk about volume later, though. This one is not visible on your pressure waveform, but when you get to your flow, so let's think about it with flow. The flows, so the breath has stopped. So the flow's at 0, right? And is about to go to the other side, but they're still taking in flow. Okay, so this is exhalation. This patient's not exhaling. You see that? They're still trying to inhale. So it's much more obvious on the flow waveform because this is normal exhalation. Okay. Here, they're still trying to inhale and then the exhalation. So you see it on the flow waveform for your premature cycle. Delay cycle. So we're not really, I told you right now we're identifying, we're not fixing. We can talk quickly about the fixes. Next semester, we're going to do a lot of fixing of these things. Okay. But as I said here, okay, they're wanting more time on inhalation. So Joe said IE ratio. We're giving them, so if they're on a 1 to 3, you're going to want to make it a 1 to 2 to give them more time inhaling. If you're setting an I time, say it's at 0.8, give them more I time, give them 1. How does that translate to flow? What would you do with flow? They want more time inhaling. Slowing down that flow so they spend more time inhaling. Okay, a delay cycle is the opposite. That one is super easy to see on your pressure waveform. So patient is ready to exhale and you're not letting them. Okay, so, and we've looked at this one already. They start to exhale, which is adding some pressure to the system, right? So you see that right there on your waveform. They're pushing up against your breath. That's delay cycle.
You would find it on your pressure, right? So you would just have that little hump on top?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
I get it now.
So they started to exhale here, but you have allowed them to exhale here. So they need to exhale earlier. So if you're, say, you're at a 0.8 I time right now, And actually you can, if you want, even measure the exact amount of time this takes. This would be 0.8 and we can say 0.7. Okay, how does that translate to flow? I time's easy to talk about here. How does that translate to flow? They want that breath to end faster. You see that? Yep, go faster. They don't want as much time inhaling. Go faster on your flow. Good. Double trigger. Big bummer that it's called trigger because it's in the cycle, right? So with a double trigger, the reason I put it under cycle is that they're getting a breath and then they're getting another breath here, right where the cycle should be. It's not cycling off, they're taking a second breath. So what that looks like on this flow waveform, they don't exhale. So you don't see the exhale side of the flow waveform. You are back up here. They have triggered the vent twice. The reason it's in cycle is because this can be more than just a cycle issue. It can be a volume issue. There's a lot that can, we're going to categorize it, but it's more than just a cycle issue. But it could be a cycle issue here. They're taking a breath and then they're taking another breath. Maybe they just need more time on that inhalation. Similar to the premature cycle. Let me just show you real quick. As you click on one of these, it takes you to Medtronic's little outline where they have different categories. We haven't talked about flow yet, but we talked about ineffective efforts, auto-triggering, double-triggering, premature, and delayed cycling. We talked about all of those. And so you can just pop into one, get a definition, get a little waveform. Okay, let's practice. These are all phase synchronies. The answer is, so I put all 6 of them over here on the side. You have to identify which type of asynchrony. So take a peek at it. Put it in your head. See if you think you know which one it is. So the 2 are the same type. There's two different ventilators, 2 different images. Good. 3 is correct. Okay, it's an auto trigger. This one, it's super hard to see the actual pressure deflection that's causing it. But you're seeing a lot of, all of a sudden it's going fast, 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 and then it slows down. Either that patient's neurologically breathing or it's an auto trigger. Here, this is a super, super typical auto trigger. You just see marching waveforms. Pretty uncommon for you and I to breathe like that. So it's probably not the patient. It's more mechanical looking, very marching out of waveforms and very fast. Okay, think of the patient's lungs right here. Do you see any exhalations? Isn't that crazy? So if we're set on 400, 400, 800, 1200, 1600, 2000, we are just filling up their lungs. There's no exhalation happening. That's pretty indicative that this is an auto trigger and not the patient. As you go through this PowerPoint, you can click on what's going on. It's going to take you to the type of asynchrony so you can test yourself, know the answer, and be able to define it as well. Okay. Click back, you're back to that page. All right, number 1 through 6. What is going on? I see two numbers up, and I think both numbers are correct that I'm seeing. I didn't see the second one. The one I put it up for that was very obvious to me was number 1, ineffective trigger. You see one right here. Maybe you just, and there's one right here as well. So you have 2 patient triggers that a breath is not delivered. So that was the obvious one to me. Some of you put up a 4, and I looked and I thought, yep, you're right. I think there's definitely some premature cycling going on, which is the one that you look at the flow waveform, and there is a patient still changing the direction of flow essentially here and not exhaling at that point. So good eye on that one. Again, so I have the answer here, ineffective efforts. You can read more on it and go back like so. Okay. 1 through 6. This is a 4. It is premature cycling. So the obvious ones on the flow waveform, where you're seeing that they're not exhaling at that point, they're still trying to inhale. And that's what you're seeing on the flow waveform. It's not that pretty, perfect exhale. Okay. But here you also see in the pressure still a different change of pressure at that same exact moment right here. Okay. So that patient needs more. We have stopped their inhalation too fast. They need more eye time. All right, 1 through 6. Okay, this is a double trigger. A double trigger, also known as a breath stack. Same thing, double trigger, breath stack. Big key is inhale, no exhale, inhale again. 2 breaths in. If you have a volume waveform, which we don't on here, you're going to see a breath that's twice as big. So if you're delivering 400, you're going to see about an 800 type breath because they're taking in 2. It's a little hard to tell on the pressure because it looks like they did release some of the pressure. Sometimes it's just one on top of the other. This one was not. That one gets a little variable, but the key here is, oh, wow, I don't have a normal exhalation at all. Okay. So that's a double trigger, also known as a breath stack. Yeah, you guys are getting this one for sure, a delay cycle. You need to let them exhale sooner. They're trying to exhale at that end of the breath, and the ventilator's not letting them. Okay, again, as you're testing yourself on those, you can just click on here. It's going to take you to the correct answer. How are you feeling about trigger and cycle asynchronies? Getting some thumbs up, some head shakes. Hopefully, I spent a lot of time on this PowerPoint so that you can test yourself and do it yourself. So I hope that helps. Goal in life to do that for all of them. Haven't managed that. Okay, assistance asynchrony. This one, some of the identifying them is not quite as easy. The fixing them gets pretty easy, but sometimes identifying, oh, I know that this is flow hunger versus volume hunger. Sometimes that gets a little hard where more so you say, well, it's either flow hunger or volume hunger, so you try both. Okay, so that last section was more, hey, it's pretty scientific, pretty obvious. We get into the art of managing a patient where it's not as obvious and you have to, oh, okay, I know how to fix some of these things. Let's see what works. Okay, I'll try to make it best as a science, but you kind of have to figure out the art here too. So assistance, let's see, did I write circles? No. Assistance is in this part of the breath, the part where the inhalation is being delivered. Okay, what is, in the mode you know, what is that part of it? It's either it's flow, it's volume, it's pressure. Right? Flow, volume, pressure, rise time. I'm going to count them there. So assistance, flow. That's a big one, adjusting your flow. If you're not on a mode that adjusts flow, what else would you adjust? Eye time. Awesome. These affect the what? Joe, you said it earlier. I to E ratio. Sure. Okay. So all of these are things that you can adjust if you're seeing some assistance asynchrony. Tidal volume. If you're in a mode that's not tidal volume, then what is it probably? Yup, it's a pressure. Okay, and the last one I'm putting in here, rise time. Those are things you're going to be adjusting if it's assistance asynchrony. So we have flow asynchronies. Either the flow is too fast for the patient or the flow is too slow for the patient. We'll look at examples. You have breath size asynchrony. Either the volume is too low or the volume is too high. We will look at examples. Mode asynchrony, we're totally not going there. Okay, not today. Next semester, we go into lots of different modes, so we'll get into it a little bit. Mode asynchrony, in a lot of ways, is, hey, I couldn't fix it with any of my other tools, so I'm changing modes. Okay, so flow asynchrony. Two things, either too much or too little. Both of these are pressure waveforms. Okay, and that's all I've included here is the pressure waveform. If you have too much flow, that one's a little subtle, I would say. You're overshooting it here and you get a bit of a spike. So if you think about it, imagine yourself getting too much flow blasted at you in your lungs. What happens to the pressure? It increases, right? And you kind of push out against it at the beginning. So that's what you're seeing here. That's a pretty obvious one. That's more well, we'll talk about that. And this one, it's just a little higher at the beginning. Okay. Too little flow, that pressure waveform, they're sucking in. And then you get this big dip. Sometimes that dip goes all the way down on your pressure waveform. I totally screwed up here, didn't I? To fix that, I would increase my flow. I have increased eye time, decreased eye time. Right? I want more flow, and so that eye time, I need to drop it for a faster flow. I thought I covered that up. I did right there. Another waveform you can look at, your PV tool. If you have too little flow, you also have a fishtail. So now we have two ways of looking at that. That fishtail is a, notice we're on the pressure, the x-axis, it's negative, just like we've done a negative deflection with, well, yeah. So we're on the negative side of the pressure waveform, negative deflection here. So both fishtail and that big dip on the pressure waveform show inspiratory flow asynchrony. Rapid rise time. This is the identical waveform that I put in the previous. This one actually is very much more specific to rise time. We've We've set rise time over and over and over on the vents without talking a lot about it. But here we would just drop our rise time so that we shouldn't have that spike at the beginning. We're just overdoing it with the pressure going in. Breath size. Have too big, have too little. Too big. On your waveforms, you're seeing overdistension. The first way we've looked at overdistension is our PP in the penguin, or the beaking, bird beak. Okay, but if you think about it, that's your pressures on the x-axis. That's just an increase of pressure. You should be able to see that increase of pressure on your scalar waveform too, and you do. Here is a spiking or an increase of pressure. Tidal volume is too high, or if you're in pressure control, what's too high?
Pressure.
Yeah, your pressure. You're seeing those lungs over distend. Don't have a lower. A lower, you're going to see super similar to the flow waveform. They're sucking wind. They need more. So that's why sometimes you see this, you adjust the flow and it doesn't help. Try adjusting the tidal volume if you have room on it. The one on the right. Okay, what's going on? But essentially what you're seeing is your main part of your breath has that. What's that? Too little flow. Yes.
The diaphragm's dropping faster.
Diaphragm, the patient is totally exceeding what the flow is giving. Absolutely. Yep. So hopefully I linked this with an answer. Flow asynchrony. That one's too little flow. Also, it could be too little tidal volume too. Okay. Easiest, always easy to just start with the flow. See if you can fix it with a flow before you start changing minute ventilations and tidal volumes. Yeah. Did I have a blank slide? No. So this is actually going back to category 1 phase. We have a breath stack, also known as a double trigger. Which falls into which category?
Cycling.
The cycling. This is only a stupid one with a dumb name. More than one name. Falls into cycle, but it's called trigger. Okay, but good. Breath stack or double trigger. No, here's your key. No exhalation in another breath given. This is wrong. How should I have drawn that? This is wrong. They didn't exhale, right?
Yeah,
There's no exhale.
It shouldn't have come down.
Shouldn't have come down. It should have just been a double-sized tidal volume. Because they didn't exhale, so they just took in two breaths. So the volume one's wrong on that. Okay, so we've gone through both categories. This particular one, I didn't categorize it in either. You can think through it and see if you have one you can argue for or not. But here, so this is actually a volume waveform. Oh my goodness, we're looking at a volume waveform. We don't really do that much. And a flow. This is a circle that I cut off because the answer's right there. So we have volume in, volume in, and not all the volume out. We have on this breath, flow in and not all flow out. We haven't reached zero. What is this? I heard it. Yeah, air trapping, definitely. Okay, this is air trapping. Our flow hasn't reached zero. And also, the tidal volume's not coming out. Apologies for the tiny, tiny flow waveform. Tidal volume's not coming out. But our flow has reached zero. Okay, let me tell you, not air trapping anymore because our flows reach zero. That's our key of air trapping. But what is it? Our tidal volume is not returning to the ventilator. Yep, absolutely. Good. It's a leak. It's a leak. My flow has reached zero, but the vent is not getting the return tidal volume. The volume's going somewhere else, which would be a leak. Okay, whether it's your small leak within your tubing somewhere, or it's a chest tube. There is a leak in your system if you're not getting your return tidal volume, but your flow is reaching zero. So that's how you tell the difference between air trapping and a leak. So why do we care? Why do we care about asynchrony? I know I've already said it, but let's say it again. Patient discomfort, dyspnea, increased work of breathing. Huge one, usually increased sedation if they're dysynchronous, which what's that lead to? Increased length of stay and increased mortality. Okay. Asynchrony is a big deal. The treatment. What is the treatment of asynchrony? Well, first of all, it is not what?
More sedation.
More sedation. Awesome. I will hopefully ingrain that in you. And I'll probably test you on it too. Okay. The treatment is you. I have the respiratory care practitioner up there. The treatment is you. It's your job.
Where is that?
I would hope that you would go through all the steps of identifying and solving asynchronies before you say, you know what, we need more sedation. Okay, that's never your first, that's never your go-to. I told you we're just identifying, we're not fixing. I'm going to talk quickly about fixes, but this is, you're not responsible for this information test-wise and stuff. A big fix that I found, and this is, I actually finally read it probably for the first time as I was going through for you guys putting this together. It was the first time I've ever read this, but clinically, I'd say the number one fix, respiratory rate. We often are exceeding patients' neurological drive. Why? They get intubated, especially this COVID world. They get intubated. They have these high minute ventilation demands. We put them on a rate of 30, 25. We put them on these high rates. They start improving. They're still sedated. We keep them on high rates. They start waking up. They're still set on a high rate. That's not their neurological demand. They're super dysynchronous. We're shearing their lungs. We're damaging their lungs. They get worse. They get proned again. They go through this terrible cycle. Why? I think a lot of it is just mismanagement of a ventilator. Okay, that yes, we needed to start at high respiratory rates, but at some point when you start waking them up, you need to know their neurological drive. Okay, so respiratory rate. If I have someone that's starting to trigger on their own, looking like they're triggering, part of my management, what I do when I'm with a patient is I go in there, I crank the rate down to 8 or 10. Why? Even if they're sick, I do it. Why do I do that?
Just slow them down so that way they have time to exhale, right?
I am just seeing what is their neurological drive right now.
Okay.
Sometimes they're sedated, so it's lower than it should be. Okay. But I am seeing what is their own neurological drive that I'm working with.
Oh, you want to see them trigger. So you
Yes.
can know
So
what
you can
their
get-
actual respiratory
Yes.
versus
Why
what
would
we're
we
talking
Oh.
about to do.
So
Correct.
you'd go below what the normal range is just
Correct.
to see what what they do, like what their baseline is.
Yep, I am just watching them. I'll go back. If they're desynchronous, I may not go back. If they're desynchronous, then I will. I'll go down. I'll see. Oh, they want 16, and I'll usually go near where they want. I won't. I'll try not to exceed them. Imagine you're on support, non-invasive or invasive, and breaths are being delivered to you past what your brain wants, past what your own drive is. What's that going to look like? I forced you to do it, haven't I already? Haven't I put you? You guys have been on the ventilator on high respiratory rates. How miserable is it? Terrible. You look terrible on the vent, right? You're not ventilating, and so you're probably acidotic. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, there's
The whole thing.
Now, this is often the problem. It's not always the answer. It's always good to know what is their neurological drive, though. Okay. So I have these in order of, as a clinician, how they work for me. Respiratory rate was like 75% of the time. Golden. Fixed it. Okay. After that, fixing flow or eye time. After that, correcting volume. After that, correcting mode. Okay. Again, this is not pieces you're accountable for right now. We're going to be fixing next semester, but just to give you a taste. So I'm not going to go into that. That's it. Questions? So as you guys identified some of these asynchronies as we actually defined them and looked at them, does that help you with your posts? Does anybody think, oh, wait, maybe this is what's going on with what I posted? Okay. If you haven't already completed your comments, go back in and say something. Okay. So, simulation. Do you guys have simulation questions?
How long can we be in the box?
How long can I be in the safety box? As long as you want, as long as you join someone else outside of the box. Okay. Simulation. I definitely need hands to help me set up. I have all the equipment we're going to need for the setup here. And please, if you haven't got together with your group and looked over the 3 different scenarios, spend some time doing that too. Otherwise, I need, and I apologize, I don't remember what order I had you guys in last time.
We were last.
If you were last, please insert yourself first or second, okay? If you were first or second, please take your turn being last. I appreciate that. So otherwise, we're at lunch until noon, okay?
So if they want to study, I'm a Wednesday group, I can help set up. So they
That'd be
can
helpful.
Groups.
I have that worksheet for you guys. I don't want to, so for those of you that are here for simulation, I have this worksheet for you. For those of you that come Wednesday, you can work on the worksheet then. You don't have to stay and do it. Okay, but you can stay if you want and work on it together. But I'm going to go print it. Do you guys prefer to do it on the computer or handwritten? It's going to be drawing. You're going to, let me print it.
You go.
Yes.
Hey, Julie, can you hear me?